What's up, guys and girls? Welcome back to another episode of Metastartup. In this episode, we're actually going to talk about the idea that goes into running a business, right? How do you pick out good ideas and how do you throw bad ideas into the dustbin?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Now, I've worked on 30 to 40 different ideas in the past. Some of them have been good, some of them have been absolute rubbish. Some of them have been successful, some of them have made no money whatsoever. And over the years, I picked up a few pointers on what are good ideas and what are bad ideas. But for this episode, I went out and did a lot of research because it's not just important to see what success is at a few $1 million of scale, right? It's important to see what success is like at a few $1 billion in revenue. And to do this, I looked at how a lot of the bigger companies have been successful and how the investors in those companies have actually thought about the company during both the investment stage as well as when the company got bigger. And I'm not just talking about companies like Facebook and Google and whatnot. Those are the outliers. I'm talking about the smaller $1 billion companies that people have not heard of or that are not as popular as Facebook or Google. So without much further ado, let's get to the deck and let's see what differentiates a good idea from a bad one. And as always, this deck is available in the Metastartup Facebook group and access to that group is free. Link is in the description below.
Unlike my usual episodes, which are generally based on my own experiences, in this one, I've looked at top tier VCs and seen how they invest as well. Because success to me right now is a few $1 million, but success to a lot of bigger VCs might be a few $1 billion. So I've taken both perspectives into account and tried to build a trend around what ideas end up succeeding and what ideas end up failing. So I've looked at entrepreneurs like Paul Graham, I've looked at VCs like Chamath Palihapitiya and a bunch of other people, and I've collected all their thoughts in this deck. I'm also going to try to run through my slide decks faster and get straight to the point. Cool. So in my opinion, the original idea is the least important part of a startup. Most successful startups today don't do what they originally set out to do. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find a startup that's doing exactly what they said they would do 5 or 6 years ago. This is because these startups' ideas and approaches towards the market change with market feedback itself. And this is one of my most important observations with Chinese entrepreneurs versus entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. Entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are all about, I want to build a mission and, what the company will do is dependent on the mission that I set for the company. Whereas in China, it's very market driven. If there's an opportunity and I can make money off of it, I will enter that market. I'm not going to say which ideology is better, but I'm going to say that generally the startups that win are the ones that end up timing the market better than anybody else. Validating your idea is important. And, I've laughed at this several times, but going out and doing a survey to potential clients might not be the best idea because sometimes customers often don't know what they want. This is going to be a cliche quote. When Henry Ford told people that if he had asked what people wanted, then they would have just said, we want faster horses. So people, or at least the market, might not know what they want. Talking about timing the market does not mean that the market already knows what they want. In some cases, they might. Usually what happens is an entrepreneur comes out and puts a product or a service out, and then the market realizes, holy shit, this is what we needed all along. Good ideas are like surfboards. And this is a quote that we use very often at Avalon. Good ideas are like surfboards. They usually follow a particular trend or timing, and the idea comes either at the very beginning of a new trend or it sparks the trend itself. But don't get me wrong, that trend was already a trend. Like if you didn't do it as an entrepreneur or if that entrepreneur didn't succeed at doing it, somebody else would have taken his place, right? So it's about a surfboard. So all you have to do is find a wave and ride. Good ideas are worthless by themselves. Everybody has good ideas. A mediocre idea well executed is better than an amazing idea that is poorly executed. On my Instagram, I get about 100 messages a day, right? And very often what happens is, I'll have young kids message me and say, Varun, I have this amazing idea to do XYZ and will you be able to help me with it? And I, obviously I'm hard pressed to find time with all the things that I'm doing, but I don't usually respond to these people. But in general, what's going on in my head is that if you really believed in your idea, then you would start working on it immediately. Even if it's a bad idea, if you work really hard at it, there's a good chance you'll be successful. Companies like Snapchat are a good example. You'll most likely have multiple ideas, and in this episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to pick a good one and discard the bad ones. One problem that kind of complicates this entire scenario is your emotions. When you have what you think is a good idea, your body and your mind will say, hey, this is an idea. I need to work on this right now. This seems like a really good idea. But without experience, you don't know what a good idea and what a bad idea is. So in the early days of your entrepreneurial journey, your body will trick you, right? So what you need to do is stop listening to what your gut says, at least for the first couple of years while you gain experience in the entrepreneurial field. And then over time, as you get smarter, as you get wiser, and as you see a few failures and successes, both of yourselves and those of others, you'll have a better idea, and your body intrinsically will decide whether something is a good idea or not. The most important factors to determine your idea's viability is, of course, the timing. Like I said, surfboard, waves. Market size, the bigger the market, chances are the more successful the idea. The competition, and a lot of people think, this means that you need to pick ideas with low competition. That's not true. In fact, the opposite is true, and I'll obviously talk a little more about this in a bit. How relatable the problem is to you. And I've said this in many interviews. If you Google me, you'll find me talking about this in several interviews. This is what sparked the idea of Avalon as well. In order for an entrepreneur to really believe and be passionate about their problems and solve it, they need to have suffered from the problems themselves. The last one is user urgency. How badly do these target users want to use a product like yours? Right? And user urgency is actually one of the most important metrics of whether your product will be adopted quickly or whether you'll have to spend 4 to 5 years before the market reaches the right wave for your surfboard to pick up pace. The worst ideas are from young founders making things they think other people will want, right? And I fell prey to this several years ago. I tried to build something that other people wanted, which didn't personally affect me. And this was when I was really young, right? Which is when I was 14 or 15. What I've realized is if you face a personal problem and you try to solve that problem, you have a higher chance of being successful because you don't have to do market research. If you don't have to do market research, then your stats aren't confused by other people telling you lies or what they think they want. Think about what part of your daily life you can improve. What's missing or broken, right? Think about, just map out your day from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep and look for all the areas that you can improve it. Millennials, and I'm talking about people like you and me, we're native to technology. Solving a problem we face will most likely solve it for a lot more people. And you don't need to do too much market research if you're a sufferer, like I just mentioned. Now, talking about bad ideas versus good ideas, it's hard to come up with good ideas if you don't have experience in a field. And, if your gut tells you, and let me think of a field I don't have any knowledge about. Let's see. Maybe protection of whales. That's random. If I got a really good idea on how to save whales, the 16-year-old me would be like, okay, let's do this. This is a good idea. I feel like it's a good idea. We can actually help those whales. But today, as I'm really old, I'm like, wait, there are several complexities to this and I haven't even seen a whale in real life, right? So just being a sufferer of your problem and understanding the environment of that problem well goes miles into deciding whether you will be successful at what you do or not. You don't get good ideas, you notice them. And like I mentioned, you need experience in a field to be able to notice an opportunity. The danger of an idea like a social network for tea lovers is that if you ask your friends or do a survey, and this is my biggest problem with surveys, right? If you ask them, when they like tea, they're not going to say, I won't use this. They say, yeah, I might use it. Even when the startup launches, it will sound interesting to a lot of people. They don't want to use it themselves, at least not right now, but they could imagine other people needing or using it. And this is the biggest red flag. If somebody says that they will not use it, but they can see other people like them using it, run away from the idea. It is a bad idea. The 5 signs of a good idea. The first one is that there's urgency among a small number of people. You want to have an idea which has a small set of people that really, really want it. Lots of people are mildly interested in a social network for tea lovers, but most such startups will fail. You don't need mild interest. Mild interest is, in fact, the worst thing to have. You need urgency. The number of people who want to use your product urgently will be a very small number, and this is a good thing. If there was a huge market that all knew what they wanted and they were willing to pay for it, then chances are a Microsoft or a Google or any other big company would already be solving that problem. Ask yourself, who wants this right now? Who wants this so bad that they'll use it even when there's a crappy beta version? And this is something that Paul Graham says over and over again. And for those of you who don't know, Paul Graham is one of the stalwarts at Y Combinator, which is a very, very popular accelerator that has several startup successes. But what he says is, look for an audience where people will be willing to urgently and immediately use a beta, not even a full completed version of your product. A large number of people suffer from the same or similar problems, but it's not urgent. So remember, I told you there's this small set of people who really want to use your product. There's also got to be a larger number of people who are not fully aware of your solution, but if presented well, if awareness is built, they will end up using it. And Snapchat and Instagram are a good example of this. Look for a small market where there's a fast path out of, right? For example, Facebook started with college dorms, right? It was just for colleges, but then they realized they could replicate that formula among all colleges in the United States. So the small path or the quick path was to build a solution like Facebook for a small audience and then replicate that formula and make it bigger once they realize it worked among small college students. How do you tell whether there's a path out of an idea? How do you tell whether you can get from small to big? How do you tell whether something is in the early days of a billion-dollar company or just something that can help maybe 100, 150 people who want it urgently? Often you can't. And this is the biggest risk that VCs and people at accelerators like Y Combinator or even Avalon as an incubator plus an accelerator, these are the kind of risks we take. We usually invest in 5 or 6 or 10 different ideas which we think there's a fast path out of, and then we find out that only 3 or 4 of them are have an actual path out of it, whereas the others stay small products, which is not a bad bet for us to take. This is something that I picked up from the book called Crossing the Chasm. So this is exactly what the last 2 points were. You have an early bunch of people who want your product urgently, and then you have the mainstream market, and finding out whether a product is good enough to go from that early set of users to the mainstream market is where 99% of a problem of a startup lies. And this is what I like to call the product market fit. You need to cross or proverbially cross this chasm by making sure you're able to go from the early market and find a fast path out to the mainstream market. Knowing which startups will cross the chasm requires a lot of experience, and I've said a little luck here, but I think there's a lot of luck and a huge marketing spend involved in finding out whether your startup is going to be big or just a small niche product. It should also seem like your startup should be an obvious part of the future. And the people who will know what are obvious parts of the future are people who are younger in nature. If you asked most 40-year-olds in 2010 whether they'd like to send disappearing pictures to their friends, they'd have laughed at that idea. But the founders of Snapchat lived on the mobile internet. To them, privacy was important even in daily communication. Live in the future and then build what's missing. The future is very region specific and culture matters. So you might be able to predict the future of India better because you live in India, but you might not be able to predict how China will be 10 years from now because you don't live there and you don't understand the trends there. Now here's a slide about competition. You need to make sure you have competition, but not too much. When you have a really good idea, you'll feel anxious about somebody else already being around and that feeling that you're too late. This is a good idea, but according to Graham, it's incredibly rare for startups to be killed by small competitors. So rare that you can almost discount the possibility. What ends up happening is because these competitors are super small, they have no market share whatsoever. And gaining that market share takes years and years and years. And usually when 2 competitors are taking market share or rather competing for a market share of a product of a market that doesn't even exist, then chances are both of them or many of them will survive. Obviously, some of them will come out to be the clear leader, but there's always a second, third, and a fourth place, which is not a bad thing. In my experience, a crowded market signals demand. Obviously, too crowded is a bad thing. If you're trying to build the next cloud services, that's stupid. There's Amazon and whatever, Google competing there. Do not compete in the market with the same product as a billion-dollar company. You will get killed. But small markets, small competitors, or big markets, small competitors, there's demand, right? Which means the small competitors are servicing that demand. Time for you to lace up and go out and build a product in the same space. Don't give too much credit to the competition. Finally, the idea isn't sexy yet. What's cool and uncool depend on what society thinks is cool and uncool. Many founders don't want to work on ideas that seem mucky. Payments, steel procurement, logistics, or anything to do with the government. I see a lot of founders come to me and pitch ideas that are that seem cool on paper, and I sort of feel like they go after these problems only because those problems are cool in the first place, or it'll make them look cool in the first place. But the best opportunities, companies like Paytm, Stripe, Delivery over the last 1 or 5 years are the ones that are now cool but did not appear cool 5 years ago. I remember being at Startup Tunnel, which is an accelerator, almost 5 years ago, and there was this gentleman that was talking about building something very similar to Paytm. And this was long before Paytm was even on the market. And this person, or rather Paytm was a small name at that point. And this person was talking about, the licensing and the effort that goes into getting, payments license from the government. And he just gave up on the idea because he said, hey, this is not cool enough, right? My relatives are not going to find it cool that I'm working on a simple wallet or payments app. But today, look at Paytm. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. If an idea is too sexy, too many people are probably already working on it. Some tips. When looking for ideas, do it in areas where you have expertise. I've beaten this horse dead. I've mentioned this 100 times. If you're a 30-year-old physics teacher, do not build a music app for teenagers unless you're a big music fan and hang out with teenagers. It might sound like a good idea, but you cannot trust your judgment because your judgment is not well developed in this field yet. Being young is an advantage. I mentioned this again. Founders in their early teens and early 20s come up with amazing ideas because you are the future, we are the future. And in terms of experience, you might not have as much experience as older people, but you understand your own behavior and the behavior of your friends, which is why you are most poised to be able to tackle those sort of problems. Look at companies that are dying and figure out what type of company will replace them, right? Usually a market will always have players, right? So make sure that when one player is about to die, what's the next company that's going to replace this? Think of what companies would buy your product and why they don't build it themselves. If there's a huge company and there's a very obvious problem, ask yourself 4 or 5 times why the biggest company in that space is not solving the problem themselves. Look for waves. Again, I've mentioned this. This is the surfboard analogy. The market will be receptive to an idea at a particular time. The first few movers profit out of it. So the best solution or the best way to be an entrepreneur is to wait and watch rather than come up with some cock and bull mission and a story for yourself and a problem you want to solve and then go after it. Instead, solve the right problems at the right time. So a problem you face, but solve it at the right time. And usually the time will be now if you face the problem on an everyday basis. Things like education, things like the travel, those are very obvious problems that you face on a daily basis, and those are big problems to be in. Traffic and travel, it seems like an unsexy or an uncool problem, but there's a lot of money to be made of it. At Avalon, we invest not only in an idea, but also in the wave it's riding on. If we feel that the time has come for an idea, we will put our money behind it. The bigger and stronger the wave, the higher the chance of us putting our money. And more importantly, we also understand that, the bigger the wave, the more the ability for us to pivot, which is start with one thing, realize the market, wants something slightly different. So we change our approach towards the market. We are a market-driven company. We are a market-driven venture fund, right? We invest based on what the market tells us to put money into. And most VCs are like this, believe it or not. So that's it for this episode. I tried to keep it as short as possible, but we still, pushed a little farther than time. But hopefully in the next episode, I will cover how to work with a core team and how to build your core team. So that's it for me today. I've been working on building an ad for Avalon, and I've been busy, just generally meeting a ton of people, doing, we're about 50 employees now. So just keeping things together has been keeping me on my toes, but hopefully I'll have the next episode up and ready very quickly. Thank you for your time, guys. This is Varun, Mayya, out.